"Sir, would you please take my seat?" Dave Grohl's voice cut through the cabin noise as he stood before the elderly veteran in coach. What happened next left the entire plane speechless. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen looked up in confusion as the rock legend offered his first-class seat. Neither man knew this moment would spark a nationwide movement, save a life, and prove that recognition is the most powerful medicine for forgotten heroes. But to understand how Dave Grohl found himself in that pivotal moment, we need to go back to earlier that morning at Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. Dave had just finished a surprise acoustic performance at Walter Reed Medical Center, playing for wounded veterans as part of an unannounced visit that had been months in the planning. The emotional weight of those bedside conversations with injured service members still lingered in his mind as he made his way through airport security. The morning had been particularly meaningful for Dave, who had always felt a deep connection to military families through his own father's service and his band's relationship with veteran communities. He'd spent 3 hours moving from room to room, playing requests, sharing stories, and simply listening to the experiences of young men and women whose sacrifices had cost them limbs, sight, and sometimes hope. Their resilience had left him humbled and inspired in equal measure. As Dave settled into his first-class seat for the flight to Los Angeles, he pulled out his phone to review photos from the morning's visit. Images of veterans' faces, lighting up during impromptu sing-alongs, filled his screen, reminding him of the healing power of music and human connection. The flight attendant offered him champagne, but Dave declined, still processing the emotional intensity of the conversations he'd shared just hours before, with warriors who deserved far more recognition than they typically received. The boarding process continued around Dave as he sat quietly, his baseball cap pulled low, hoping to avoid recognition and maintain the reflective mood that had settled over him. He watched passengers file past, each carrying their own stories, their own destinations, their own burdens and joys. This people-watching had become a habit for Dave, a way of staying connected to the humanity that inspired his music and kept him grounded despite his fame. That's when Dave first noticed Staff Sergeant Robert Chen making his way down the aisle toward the coach section. The elderly man moved slowly, his left leg slightly stiff from an old injury, his posture still military straight despite his advanced age. Dave's trained eye caught the subtle details: the perfectly creased uniform, the collection of service ribbons, the way other passengers unconsciously made space for him, sensing something honorable in his bearing without necessarily understanding its source. Robert Chen had been traveling from a ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery, where he had finally received recognition for his service in Vietnam 53 years after his tours ended. The Purple Heart and Bronze Star ceremonies had been delayed by bureaucratic complications and lost paperwork, but the Army had finally made things right. Now at 74, Robert was flying home to his granddaughter's college graduation, carrying medals that had taken decades to arrive. As Robert struggled slightly with his heavy duffel bag in the overhead compartment, Dave felt an immediate urge to help. Something about the man's dignified determination reminded him of the veterans he'd met that morning at Walter Reed. The bag was clearly packed with more than clothes. It held the weight of memories, service records, and probably the medals he'd just received. Dave watched as Robert finally managed to secure his belongings, refusing assistance from nearby passengers with polite but firm independence. Dave found himself studying Robert's face as the older man settled into his middle seat in coach, squeezed between a businessman on his laptop and a college student with headphones. There was something familiar about Robert's quiet dignity, the way he folded his hands and gazed out the small window. It reminded Dave of his grandfather, another veteran who had rarely spoken about his service but carried its lessons in every aspect of his daily life. The flight attendant began the safety demonstration, but Dave's attention remained focused on the veteran sitting several rows behind him. He noticed how Robert closed his eyes during takeoff, perhaps saying a prayer or simply steadying himself for the journey ahead. The sight stirred something deep in Dave's chest, a recognition of sacrifice that demanded acknowledgement, though he wasn't yet sure what form that acknowledgement should take. As the plane reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign dinged off, Dave made a decision that would surprise everyone on board, including himself. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, his tall frame unfolding in the spacious first-class cabin. Several passengers glanced up from their tablets and magazines, recognizing the rock star, but uncertain about his intentions as he moved purposefully toward the back of the plane. Dave's approach to Robert's row caused a subtle stir among nearby passengers, some recognizing him immediately, while others simply noticed the confident way he carried himself. The businessman beside Robert looked up from his laptop with mild annoyance, clearly expecting to be asked to move for some celebrity whim. The college student pulled off her headphones, suddenly alert to the developing situation. None of them anticipated what Dave was about to propose. "Excuse me, sir," Dave said quietly, leaning down to Robert's eye level to avoid drawing unnecessary attention from the entire cabin. "I noticed your uniform and wanted to thank you for your service." Robert looked up with surprise, his weathered face breaking into a small smile of appreciation. He extended his hand to shake Dave's, a gesture that immediately established mutual respect between the two men, despite their different backgrounds and generations. "I appreciate that, son," Robert replied, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to choosing words carefully. "I was just at Arlington for a ceremony. Finally got some recognition that was 50 years overdue." He chuckled softly, no bitterness in his tone, despite the bureaucratic delays that had kept him waiting decades for proper acknowledgement of his sacrifice. His acceptance of injustice with grace impressed Dave immediately. Dave felt his chest tighten at Robert's casual mention of delayed recognition, thinking of all the veterans he'd met over the years who had waited too long for proper honor. "What branch did you serve in?" Dave asked, genuinely interested in Robert's story, rather than simply making polite conversation. This authentic curiosity was characteristic of Dave's interactions with people, whether famous musicians or everyday heroes he encountered in his travels. "Army, 2 tours in Vietnam," Robert answered simply, his eyes holding memories he didn't need to elaborate on for Dave to understand their weight. "Lost some good friends over there, but we did what we were called to do." The quiet dignity in his response reminded Dave of conversations he'd had with his own father about service, sacrifice, and the complicated emotions that veterans carried long after their active duty ended. As they talked, Dave noticed the cramped conditions of Robert's middle seat, how the elderly veteran had to shift frequently to accommodate his stiff leg, how the armrests barely provided enough space for his broad shoulders. The businessman beside him had spread his materials across both armrests, leaving Robert with minimal space. The contrast with Dave's spacious first-class accommodations suddenly felt wrong, almost insulting to someone who had served his country with distinction. "Sir, I have a proposition for you," Dave said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "I'm sitting in first class, and frankly I think you've earned that seat more than I have." Robert's eyebrows raised in surprise, clearly not expecting such an offer from a stranger. The college student beside them had stopped pretending not to listen, her eyes wide with amazement at the conversation unfolding next to her. Robert immediately began to protest, his military training making him uncomfortable with special treatment or charity. "Oh no, son, I couldn't possibly accept that. You paid for your ticket, and I'm perfectly fine back here." His polite refusal was exactly what Dave had expected from a man of Robert's generation and character. But Dave had anticipated this response and was prepared to present his case more persuasively. "With respect, sir, this isn't charity," Dave said firmly but kindly. "This is recognition. You served our country when it asked you to, and the least I can do is make your flight home comfortable." He gestured toward the first-class cabin. "Besides, I spend most of my flights working on music anyway. The extra legroom won't change my ability to write songs, but it might help that leg you're favoring." The businessman finally looked up from his laptop, recognizing Dave Grohl, and suddenly understanding the significance of the conversation happening beside him. Other passengers in nearby rows had begun to notice the interaction, some whispering to their companions about the identity of the tall man in the baseball cap who was offering his first-class seat to the elderly veteran. The attention made Robert even more uncomfortable with the proposed arrangement. "I really don't need any special treatment," Robert insisted, though his voice carried less conviction than before. The long day at Arlington, combined with the emotional weight of finally receiving his delayed medals, had taken more of a toll than he wanted to admit. The prospect of stretching out his stiff leg in a comfortable seat was tempting, even if his pride resisted accepting such generosity from a stranger. Dave sensed Robert's internal struggle and decided to share something personal to ease the man's discomfort with accepting help. "My dad served too," Dave said quietly. "He never talked much about it, but I saw how it shaped him. I learned from him that sometimes accepting kindness allows others to honor what you've done. You're not taking something you don't deserve. You're letting me say thank you properly." This reframing of the gesture as an opportunity for Dave to express gratitude rather than charity seemed to resonate with Robert. His posture relaxed slightly, and he looked at Dave with new understanding. "Your father raised you right," Robert said simply. "If it means that much to you to say thank you this way, then I accept your generous offer." The grace in his acceptance impressed everyone within earshot. As Dave helped Robert gather his belongings from the overhead compartment, handling the heavy duffel bag with care, other passengers began to realize what was happening. A soft murmur of approval rippled through the coach section as word spread about the seat exchange. The flight attendant, Sarah Martinez, approached with concern, thinking there might be a problem with seating arrangements that needed official intervention. "Is everything all right here?" Sarah asked professionally, though her expression softened when she saw Dave carefully helping Robert with his bag. "We're just switching seats," Dave explained with a smile. "Mr. Chen here deserves the first-class treatment more than I do." Sarah's eyes widened as she realized the rock star was voluntarily giving up his premium seat for the elderly veteran. Sarah had been a flight attendant for 12 years and had seen many acts of kindness, but something about this gesture struck her as particularly meaningful. She could see the genuine respect in Dave's eyes as he looked at Robert, and the veteran's dignified acceptance of an honor long overdue. "Let me help you get settled in first class, Mr. Chen," she offered warmly, immediately understanding her role in facilitating this meaningful exchange. As they walked toward the first-class cabin, Dave noticed how other passengers watched Robert with new attention, many smiling appreciatively at the elderly man who carried himself with such quiet dignity. A few passengers nodded respectfully as Robert passed, instinctively recognizing something honorable about him, even without knowing the details of his service. The moment felt charged with significance that extended beyond a simple seat swap. Robert paused as he reached Dave's original first-class seat, overwhelmed by the spaciousness and comfort compared to his middle seat in coach. "This is really too much," he murmured, though his eyes betrayed his relief at the prospect of stretching his legs. Dave waved off his continued protests. "Nothing's too much for someone who served our country. Please, make yourself comfortable." As Robert settled into the plush first-class seat, Dave gathered his guitar case and notebook, preparing to move to Robert's former spot in coach. Several first-class passengers had been watching the exchange with interest, and a woman across the aisle leaned forward with a warm smile. "That was beautiful to witness," she said quietly to Dave. "Your parents must be very proud of the man they raised." Dave simply nodded his thanks and made his way to the coach section, where the college student who had been sitting beside Robert immediately offered him the window seat. "After what you just did, the least I can do is give you the better spot," she said with genuine admiration. Dave accepted gracefully, settling into the cramped middle seat with no complaints about the reduced comfort. The businessman who had been hogging the armrest suddenly became acutely aware of his selfishness, quietly pulling his materials closer to his own space and offering Dave more room. Word of the seat exchange had spread through the coach cabin, creating an atmosphere of increased courtesy and consideration among passengers. Dave's gesture seemed to have awakened something generous in the entire section. As the flight continued, Dave found himself in conversation with nearby passengers who had witnessed the exchange. The college student Maria Santos shared that her grandfather had also served in Vietnam, but had passed away before receiving proper recognition for his service. "Seeing you honor that man the way you did," she said quietly, "it felt like you were honoring my grandfather too." Meanwhile, in first class, Robert was experiencing his first taste of premium air travel at age 74. Sarah brought him a warm towel and offered him champagne, which he politely declined in favor of coffee. "I've never flown first class before," he admitted to Sarah. "Spent most of my life thinking it was just for rich folks and celebrities. Never imagined I'd be here because someone thought I earned it." Sarah found herself staying longer at Robert's seat than protocol required, drawn in by his stories of service and the delayed recognition ceremony at Arlington. As he described finally receiving his Purple Heart and Bronze Star after 5 decades of bureaucratic delays, she felt honored to be witnessing this moment of long overdue comfort and respect. His humility, despite his heroism, impressed her deeply. Back in coach, Dave was quietly working on song lyrics in his notebook, inspired by the morning's visit to Walter Reed and his conversation with Robert. The businessman beside him, initially annoyed by the disruption, found himself curious about Dave's creative process. "Are you writing about today?" he asked quietly. Dave looked up with a smile. "Sometimes the best songs come from unexpected moments with unexpected people." The businessman introduced himself as Marcus Williams, a defense contractor who worked with veteran employment programs. Learning about Dave's morning at Walter Reed and his gesture toward Robert, Marcus shared his own experiences with veterans transitioning to civilian careers. Their conversation evolved into a deeper discussion about service, sacrifice, and society's debt to those who defend it. As they talked, Marcus revealed that his company had been struggling to find ways to meaningfully honor veteran employees beyond standard corporate benefits. Dave's simple act of recognition had sparked ideas about how businesses could better acknowledge military service. "Sometimes the gesture matters more than the gift," Marcus mused, watching how Dave's kindness had elevated the entire atmosphere of their section. 2 hours into the flight, Sarah approached Dave and coach with a message from the captain. "Captain Rodriguez would like to speak with you and Mr. Chen if you're both available," she said quietly. "He's a veteran himself and was quite moved when he heard about your gesture. He has something special he'd like to share with both of you." Dave and Robert met in the galley area, where Captain Rodriguez, a former Air Force pilot, greeted them both with obvious emotion. "Gentlemen, I've been flying for 25 years, and I've never seen anything quite like what happened on my aircraft today," he began. "Mr. Grohl, your recognition of Mr. Chen's service reminds us all what respect looks like. Mr. Chen, your grace in accepting that recognition shows us how to receive honor with dignity." Captain Rodriguez continued, "I wanted to let you both know that this flight will be arriving early due to favorable winds, but more importantly, I've arranged for something special at LAX." He paused, clearly emotional. Sometimes the universe aligns to create moments that matter more than we initially realize. What started as a simple gesture of kindness is about to become something much larger. The captain's mysterious words left both Dave and Robert curious, but he refused to elaborate further, simply smiling and returning to the cockpit. Sarah escorted them back to their seats with knowing looks that suggested she was privy to whatever surprise awaited them. The anticipation created a new energy throughout the cabin as word spread that something special was planned for landing. As the flight began its descent into Los Angeles, Dave found himself reflecting on the chain of events that had led to this moment. The morning visit to Walter Reed, the chance encounter with Robert, the spontaneous decision to switch seats. Each element had felt separate at the time, but now seemed part of a larger pattern of connection and recognition that he couldn't have planned if he'd tried. Robert, meanwhile, was experiencing a mix of gratitude and curiosity about the attention his simple plane ride had generated. In his 74 years, he had rarely been the center of such positive focus. The delayed medals ceremony at Arlington had been meaningful but small. This unexpected recognition from a famous stranger felt surreal but genuine. He found himself hoping his granddaughter would understand the significance when he told her about the flight. The landing at LAX proceeded smoothly, but as they taxied to the gate, passengers noticed an unusual amount of activity on the tarmac. Ground crew members seemed to be gathering near their gate, and several official-looking vehicles were visible through the small windows. Sarah's announcement asking passengers to remain seated after arrival only added to the mounting anticipation about what was planned. As the plane came to a complete stop, Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin deplaning, I want to share something special with you. Today's flight has been honored by the presence of Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, a Vietnam veteran who, after 53 years, finally received the medals he earned in service to our country." The captain continued. "Also aboard is Dave Grohl, who recognized Sergeant Chen's service in a way that embodies the respect every veteran deserves. Sometimes ordinary flights become extraordinary because of the people who choose to see and honor each other. What you're about to witness is the result of a few phone calls I made during our flight." Through the aircraft windows, passengers could now see a small honor guard from the local American Legion post assembled on the tarmac, along with airport officials and what appeared to be media representatives. The sight sent murmurs of amazement through the cabin as people realized that Dave's simple gesture had somehow grown into something much larger and more significant. "Mr. Chen," Captain Rodriguez announced, "your granddaughter Emily has been contacted and is waiting for you in the terminal, along with some folks who wanted to properly welcome a hero home. Mr. Grohl, your manager reached out after hearing about today's events and arranged for a few surprises of his own. Sometimes kindness creates a ripple effect we never see coming." As the cabin door opened, Sarah appeared beside Robert's seat with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Chen, would you do us the honor of being the first passenger to deplane today?" she asked. "There are some people outside who have been waiting a long time to say thank you properly." Robert looked overwhelmed but deeply moved as he gathered his belongings, his hands trembling slightly with emotion. Dave stood as Robert prepared to leave, extending his hand one final time. "It's been an honor to meet you, sir," Dave said sincerely. "Thank you for your service, and thank you for letting me say thank you the only way I knew how." Robert clasped Dave's hand firmly. "Son, you've given an old soldier one of the best days of his life. Your parents raised you right." As Robert stepped off the plane, the honor guard saluted in perfect unison, a sight that brought tears to the eyes of passengers watching through windows. The airport's chief of operations stepped forward to officially welcome Robert home, thanking him for his service and acknowledging the long delay in proper recognition. The elderly veteran stood straighter than he had all day, his military bearing fully restored. Dave followed shortly after, surprised to find his own manager waiting with representatives from several veteran organizations. "What you did today," his manager explained quickly, "got some attention. These folks want to talk about ways to expand that kind of recognition for other veterans. Sometimes a simple gesture opens doors we didn't know existed." In the terminal, Dave watched as Robert was reunited with his granddaughter Emily, a college senior whose pride in her grandfather was evident in her tearful embrace. She approached Dave immediately afterward. "Thank you for seeing what I've always seen in him," she said simply. "He's never asked for recognition, but he's always deserved it. You gave him something I could never give him, acknowledgement from his country." The American Legion representatives presented Robert with a special commendation for his service, acknowledging both his military sacrifice and his dignity in finally receiving proper recognition. The ceremony was impromptu but deeply meaningful, creating a moment of honor that decades of bureaucratic delays had prevented. Robert accepted the recognition with the same grace he had shown throughout the day. Meanwhile, representatives from veteran service organizations approached Dave about creating a formal program to recognize military service in everyday settings. His spontaneous gesture had sparked ideas about how civilians could meaningfully acknowledge veterans they encountered. "What you did was simple but powerful," one organizer explained. "We'd like to help others do the same thing." A local news crew, alerted by airport officials, had arrived to document the impromptu ceremony. However, both Dave and Robert declined on-camera interviews, preferring to keep the focus on the message rather than the personalities involved. "This isn't about us," Dave explained to reporters. "It's about remembering that heroes walk among us every day, and we should acknowledge them when we see them." The airport ceremony concluded with Robert and Emily being escorted to their connecting flight with VIP treatment, ensuring the elderly veteran's comfort for the remainder of his journey home. Dave watched them go with deep satisfaction, knowing that a simple decision to offer his seat had created a moment of recognition that Robert would carry with him for the rest of his life. As Dave prepared to leave the airport, Marcus Williams, the defense contractor from their flight, approached with a business card. "I meant what I said about your gesture inspiring new ideas for veteran recognition," Marcus said. "My company would like to discuss creating a program based on what you did today. Sometimes the simplest acts have the biggest impact." The ripple effects of the flight continued to unfold over the following days. Airport officials implemented a new program to recognize military personnel traveling through LAX, inspired by the impromptu ceremony they had witnessed. The American Legion post that had provided the honor guard began planning regular events to welcome veterans home from their travels, creating ongoing opportunities for public recognition. Emily Chen posted a single photo on social media, her grandfather in the first-class seat Dave had given him, smiling with genuine joy. Her caption read simply, "Sometimes strangers become angels. Thank you to the kind man who saw my grandfather's worth and acted on it. This is what respect looks like." The post went viral within hours, spreading the story far beyond the original flight. Dave's record label received hundreds of messages from veterans and military families, sharing their own stories of service and thanking him for his gesture of recognition. Rather than capitalizing on the positive publicity, Dave asked his publicist to redirect attention to veteran support organizations, using his platform to amplify resources rather than his own image. The American Legion posts that had honored Robert began receiving donations from people inspired by the story, funding their ability to provide recognition ceremonies for other veterans who had experienced delayed acknowledgement. The spontaneous honor guard formation at LAX had demonstrated the power of immediate, heartfelt recognition, inspiring similar programs at airports across the country. Marcus Williams followed through on his proposal, working with his company to create a formal veteran recognition program for corporate travel. The initiative, dubbed the Empty Chair, encouraged employees to offer premium seats or accommodations to military personnel they encountered while traveling. Dave's simple gesture had become a replicable model for everyday honor. 3 weeks after the flight, Dave received a handwritten letter from Robert, thanking him again for his kindness and sharing that his granddaughter's graduation had been made even more special by his renewed sense of dignity and recognition. "You reminded an old soldier that his service still matters," Robert wrote. "That's a gift I'll carry with me for whatever time I have left." The letter included a photo from Emily's graduation ceremony, showing Robert in his dress uniform with his newly received medals proudly displayed. His posture was straight, his eyes bright with purpose renewed. Emily stood beside him, both of them radiating the pride that had been restored through a chain of recognition that began with a simple offer of a first-class seat. Dave framed the letter and photo, placing them in his home studio where he could see them while writing music. The image of Robert's restored dignity served as a daily reminder of how small acts of recognition could transform lives. The lesson influenced not only Dave's personal interactions, but also the themes that began appearing in his songwriting. 6 months later, Dave was invited to perform at a veteran recognition gala where Robert was being honored as Veteran of the Year by his local American Legion post. The elderly man had become a spokesperson for delayed recognition issues, using his story to advocate for other veterans still waiting for proper acknowledgement of their service. At the gala, Dave and Robert were reunited on stage, their friendship having deepened through continued correspondence and shared commitment to veteran recognition. Dave performed an acoustic version of My Hero, dedicating it to Robert and all veterans who had served without seeking recognition. The performance brought the audience to their feet in sustained applause. During his remarks that evening, Robert shared how Dave's gesture had changed more than just his flight experience. "Sometimes we carry invisible wounds from feeling forgotten or unappreciated," he said. "One man's decision to see my worth and act on it healed something in me that I didn't even realize was broken. That's the power of recognition. It doesn't just acknowledge the past, it restores hope for the future." The veteran recognition program Marcus had developed had expanded to over 200 companies nationwide, creating thousands of opportunities for everyday acknowledgement of military service. Airport participation had grown to include major hubs across the country, with veterans routinely receiving upgrades, priority boarding, and ceremonial recognition when identified by airline staff or fellow passengers. Emily Chen, inspired by her grandfather's experience, changed her college major to social work, with a focus on veteran services. She credited Dave's gesture with showing her how individual actions could create systemic change. "Watching someone truly see my grandfather's worth made me want to spend my life helping other people feel seen and valued," she explained in interviews about her career change. The story had evolved from a simple seat exchange into a nationwide movement of veteran recognition, with Dave Grohl moments becoming shorthand for spontaneous acts of military appreciation. Veterans Affairs hospitals began implementing similar recognition programs, understanding that dignity and acknowledgement were as important as medical care in the healing process. On the first anniversary of their flight, Dave and Robert met again at LAX, this time for the unveiling of a permanent memorial recognizing all veterans who traveled through the airport. The plaque included an inscription inspired by their encounter: "To those who served, your sacrifice is seen, your service is honored, your dignity is recognized." The ceremony attracted veterans from across California. During the memorial dedication, Captain Rodriguez, who had facilitated the original recognition ceremony, announced his retirement and his decision to volunteer full-time with veteran recognition programs. "Some flights change your perspective forever," he said. "Witnessing what happened on my aircraft that day reminded me that our real purpose isn't just to transport people. It's to transport hope, dignity, and recognition to those who need it most." Sarah Martinez, the flight attendant who had helped facilitate the seat exchange, had been promoted to training supervisor, where she now taught customer service classes that included modules on recognizing and honoring veterans. Her training program, known as Eyes Wide Open, had been adopted by multiple airlines, teaching staff to identify and appropriately acknowledge military personnel. The ripple effects continued to expand in unexpected directions. Maria Santos, the college student who had sat beside Dave and Coach, organized a veteran recognition program at her university, creating a scholarship fund for military families and hosting regular events to honor student veterans. Her work directly traced back to witnessing Dave's gesture and feeling inspired to create her own opportunities for recognition. 2 years after the flight, Robert's health began to decline, but his spirits remained high due to the renewed sense of purpose he had found through veteran advocacy. He had spoken at dozens of recognition ceremonies, always crediting Dave's simple gesture with transforming his understanding of his own worth. "Sometimes it takes a stranger to remind us who we really are," became his signature closing line. When Robert passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 76, Dave served as one of his pallbearers, their friendship having grown into something resembling family. Emily asked Dave to speak at the funeral, where he shared how Robert had taught him that recognition was a gift both people receive. The giver learns about dignity, while the receiver experiences restored worth. At Robert's funeral, representatives from all the programs his story had inspired gathered to honor the man whose grace in receiving recognition had become a model for dignity. The American Legion Honor Guard that had first saluted him at LAX provided the funeral honors, completing a circle of respect that had begun with an impulsive decision to share a first-class seat. Emily inherited her grandfather's medals and the letters he had received from veterans inspired by his story. She established the Robert Chen Recognition Foundation, dedicated to ensuring that no veteran would wait decades for appropriate acknowledgement of their service. Dave agreed to serve on the foundation's board, continuing his commitment to the movement Robert's story had sparked. The Foundation's first major initiative was a partnership with the Department of Veterans Affairs to identify and honor veterans who had experienced delayed recognition similar to Robert's. The program, dubbed No Veteran Left Behind in Appreciation, had processed over 5,000 cases in its first year, providing ceremonies and acknowledgement to service members who had been forgotten by bureaucratic delays. Dave's own perspective on fame and recognition had been permanently altered by his relationship with Robert. He began using his platform more deliberately to highlight everyday heroes, understanding that his visibility could amplify recognition for those who deserved it more than he did. His social media presence became a regular showcase of veteran stories and recognition ceremonies. 5 years after their flight, the annual First Class Recognition Day had become a national observance, with airlines, airports, and transportation companies nationwide participating in programs to honor military personnel. The day always fell on the anniversary of Dave and Robert's flight, ensuring that their story remained connected to the ongoing movement it had inspired. The programs had evolved beyond simple seat upgrades to include comprehensive recognition systems, priority boarding for all veterans, dedicated service areas in airports, partnerships with hotels and rental car companies, and training programs for service industry workers on appropriate ways to acknowledge military service. The simple gesture had become a systematic approach to ongoing appreciation. Medical research conducted on the psychological impact of public recognition showed measurable improvements in veteran mental health when communities actively acknowledged their service. Robert's transformation from forgotten soldier to celebrated advocate had become a case study in how dignity and recognition could heal wounds that medical treatment alone couldn't address. His story proved that respect was therapeutic. Dave's music had also been influenced by his friendship with Robert, with several songs directly inspired by their relationship and the veteran recognition movement. His album, Unsung Heroes, included tracks about service, sacrifice, and the healing power of acknowledgement. The proceeds funded veteran recognition programs nationwide, ensuring that the music itself became a vehicle for ongoing appreciation. As the movement approached its 5th anniversary, researchers at UCLA began studying the Grohl effect, their term for how individual acts of recognition could create lasting social change. Robert's story had become a textbook example of how personal transformation could scale into institutional reform, proving that systemic change often began with individual choices to see and honor others. The study's preliminary findings suggested that Robert's experience was not unique, that many veterans carried invisible wounds from feeling unappreciated, and that simple recognition could provide healing that decades of traditional therapy had not achieved. The research validated what Dave had instinctively understood, that seeing and acknowledging someone's worth was among the most powerful gifts one person could give another. But the most unexpected development came during the 5th anniversary commemoration ceremony at LAX, when Emily Chen announced that her grandfather had left behind a journal documenting his experiences since the flight. The entries revealed the profound internal transformation that had begun the moment Dave offered his seat, showing how a single gesture had restored not just Robert's sense of dignity, but his will to live fully. The journal's first entry, written the night after the flight, read, "Today a stranger saw something in me that I thought I had lost forever. He saw a soldier worthy of honor, not an old man taking up space. For the first time in decades, I feel like my service mattered. I feel like I matter." The progression through subsequent entries documented a man rediscovering his own worth. Later entries described Robert's decision to pursue delayed recognition for other veterans, his choice to become an advocate rather than simply a recipient of kindness. "I understand now that receiving honor gracefully is its own form of service," he had written. "When we accept recognition with dignity, we teach others how to give it meaningfully. Dave didn't just give me his seat, he taught me how to sit in it with pride." The journal revealed that Robert had been contemplating the meaninglessness of his final years before the flight, feeling forgotten and purposeless despite his military service. Dave's gesture had provided not just comfort, but renewed reason for living. I thought my story was ending, Robert had written. Instead, it was just beginning a new chapter. Sometimes angels wear baseball caps and carry guitars. The most powerful entry came from just days before Robert's death. I'm not afraid anymore because I know my life had meaning. Dave helped me remember that, and Emily will carry it forward. The recognition I received wasn't just for my past service. It gave me purpose for my remaining time. That's the real miracle. When someone sees your worth, it reminds you to live up to it. Emily's decision to share her grandfather's journal at the anniversary ceremony brought Dave to tears as he listened to the profound impact their brief encounter had created. The words revealed that what had seemed like a simple gesture had actually saved a life, restored purpose, and created a legacy that would outlive them all. The audience sat in stunned silence as Emily read passages that demonstrated the transformative power of recognition. The journal entries also revealed Robert's detailed observations about how recognition rippled through communities, creating chains of kindness that extended far beyond the original gesture. He had documented dozens of instances where his story had inspired others to acknowledge veterans, creating what he called dignity multiplication. Each act of recognition inspiring more acts of recognition in an endless cycle of appreciation and respect. Reading from her grandfather's final entries, Emily shared his vision for a world where recognition wasn't rare or special, but simply part of how people treated each other. Every person carries invisible service, Robert had written. Soldiers, teachers, caregivers, first responders, everyone who puts others before themselves deserves to be seen and honored. Dave taught me that recognition isn't about status, it's about human dignity. The ceremony concluded with the announcement of a new initiative, the Robert Chen Recognition Institute, dedicated to training individuals and organizations in the art of meaningful acknowledgement. Dave committed to funding the program for its first 5 years, ensuring that Robert's insights about dignity and recognition would be systematically taught to future generations of leaders, service providers, and ordinary citizens. As the formal ceremony ended, Dave found himself standing alone at the memorial plaque, reading the inscription that had been inspired by his and Robert's story. The words seemed to carry extra weight now, knowing how they had lived in Robert's heart during his final years. The simple phrase, "Your sacrifice is seen," had become Robert's daily affirmation, proof that he mattered. Emily approached Dave at the memorial, carrying a small box that she handed to him with tears in her eyes. Inside was Robert's original Purple Heart, the medal he had waited 53 years to receive. "Grandpa wanted you to have this," she said quietly. "He wrote in his journal that you gave him something more valuable than any medal. You gave him his dignity back. He wanted you to carry this as a reminder that recognition saves lives." Dave accepted the medal with trembling hands, understanding the magnitude of the gift and the responsibility it represented. The Purple Heart, earned through blood and sacrifice in Vietnam, had become a symbol of much more than military service. It represented the healing power of recognition, the importance of seeing others' worth, and the responsibility to act on that recognition when opportunities arose. Standing together at the memorial, Dave and Emily made a pact to continue Robert's work, ensuring that his story would keep inspiring recognition and dignity for veterans and all people whose service went unacknowledged. The Purple Heart would remain with Dave, a daily reminder of how a simple decision to offer a first-class seat had cascaded into a movement that honored thousands of forgotten heroes. The anniversary ceremony had revealed the full scope of Robert's transformation and the continuing impact of Dave's gesture. What had begun as an impulsive act of kindness had become a documented case study in how recognition could heal, inspire, and multiply across communities. Robert's journal proved that dignity wasn't just nice to have, it was essential for human flourishing. As attendees dispersed from the memorial ceremony, many paused to share their own stories of recognition received or given, proving that Robert's vision of dignity multiplication was actively occurring. Dave listened to dozens of accounts of how the original story had inspired everyday acts of acknowledgement, from upgraded hotel rooms for veterans to priority seating at restaurants, each gesture echoing the original flight's lesson about seeing worth and acting on it. In the days following the anniversary ceremony, Dave found himself reflecting on how completely his understanding of fame and influence had been transformed by his friendship with Robert. The Purple Heart on his desk served as a daily reminder that true impact came not from entertainment or celebrity, but from the simple act of seeing and honoring the dignity in others. The veteran recognition programs that had grown from their story continued to expand, with quarterly reports showing measurable improvements in veteran mental health, community engagement, and sense of belonging. The data confirmed what Robert's journal had documented personally, that recognition was not just courtesy, but essential medicine for souls wounded by feeling invisible or forgotten by the society they had served. Emily completed her master's degree in social work and officially took over day-to-day operations of the Robert Chen Recognition Foundation, bringing her grandfather's insights about dignity into systematic practice. Her first initiative was a program training healthcare workers, educators, and service industry employees in recognizing and honoring the everyday heroes they encountered in their work. Dave's role in the foundation evolved from founder to ambassador, using his platform to share stories of recognition and its impact, while ensuring that credit remained focused on the recipients rather than the givers. His appearances at recognition ceremonies always emphasized that the heroes were those being honored, not those doing the honoring. A lesson Robert had taught him about the proper balance of acknowledgement. The ripple effects reached international dimensions when foreign airlines began implementing similar recognition programs, understanding that military service and everyday heroism existed in every culture. The LAX model of veteran recognition became a template studied and adapted by transportation systems worldwide, proving that Robert's story had universal resonance about human dignity and acknowledgement. Research studies continued to validate the psychological and social benefits of systematic recognition, with Robert's documented transformation serving as primary evidence for policy recommendations about veteran care, community mental health, and organizational culture. His journey from despair to purpose had become scientific proof of recognition's healing power. 5 years later, the annual Recognition Day had evolved into a week-long celebration of service in all its forms, with communities across the nation hosting ceremonies to honor not just veterans, but teachers, first responders, caregivers, and community volunteers. Robert's vision of expanded recognition had become reality, with his story serving as the foundational inspiration for acknowledging all forms of service. Dave's final visit to Robert's grave before the 6th anniversary brought Emily along, both of them carrying letters from veterans whose lives had been changed by recognition programs inspired by Robert's story. They read the letters aloud at his gravestone, sharing testimonies of restored dignity, renewed purpose, and healing that traced directly back to one man's gracious acceptance of a first-class seat and the recognition it represented. Today, the Robert Chen Recognition Institute has trained over 50,000 individuals in the principles of meaningful acknowledgement, creating a multiplication effect that reaches millions of people annually. Veterans report feeling more valued and connected to their communities, while those providing recognition describe deeper satisfaction and purpose in their interactions with others. The simple exchange of a seat had become a systematic transformation of how society honors service. Dave continues to carry Robert's Purple Heart with him when traveling, occasionally sharing the story with fellow passengers when he encounters veterans or others whose service deserves acknowledgement. Each telling of the story creates new opportunities for recognition, ensuring that Robert's legacy continues to expand through countless individual moments of dignity and respect. The LAX Memorial has become a pilgrimage site for veterans and their families, with thousands visiting annually to reflect on the importance of recognition and to commit to acknowledging service in their own communities. The plaque's simple message continues to resonate. Recognition isn't just about honoring the past, it's about creating hope for the future. Emily recently announced the Foundation's next major initiative, a recognition training program for schools teaching children to identify and honor everyday heroes in their communities. The program ensures that Robert's insights about dignity will shape the next generation's understanding of how to see and acknowledge worth in others, creating a future where recognition is natural rather than exceptional. The program's pilot schools report remarkable improvements in student empathy, community engagement, and respect for diverse forms of service. Children trained in recognition principles naturally begin acknowledging janitors, cafeteria workers, crossing guards, and other overlooked heroes, proving that dignity multiplication can be taught and systematically cultivated in future generations. As the movement approaches its 7th anniversary, researchers estimate that over 2 million people have been directly or indirectly impacted by recognition programs that trace their origins to Dave's decision to offer his first-class seat to Robert. The geometric expansion of dignity and acknowledgement has exceeded even Robert's most optimistic journal projections about how recognition could multiply across communities and generations. Have you ever had the opportunity to recognize someone whose service went unacknowledged? Have you experienced the transformative power of being truly seen and honored for your contributions? Dave Grohl's simple decision to offer his seat to Robert Chen reminds us that recognition isn't just courtesy, it's medicine for souls wounded by invisibility. And each moment we choose to see and honor others creates ripples that can heal communities and restore hope. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe in the life-changing power of recognition and the dignity every person deserves to feel valued for their service to others.